Hey sellers, welcome back. Rob here. So we're going to be doing another tutorial. This is going to be part two of my air support series. The first one was just a basic intro to cover some basic concepts. And this one's going to be more samples and examples of play and how to apply air support to your ASL games. So got a lot to cover, so let's get into it. So things we got to consider when contemplating using air support is it's not available under the following three conditions, and night rules are in effect. Obviously, you have overcast EC, and if your target location is in fog. So if it's above the fog line, say on a hill, for example, then you can perfectly use air support. But aside from that, you just have those three restrictions. Typically, your scenario is going to have an SSR, which assigns aircraft, if you get any, what kind they are, with or without bombs, when they arrive, and or when they're recalled. But sometimes not always. If you look at the bottom SSR, it just says each side receives random air support, so there is some dice rolling for determining which turn they roll in, and we covered that in the basic video, but basically it's one die less the turn number, so you're never going to see anything in turn one, or maybe not at all, depending on how poorly you roll. It is unusual to have both sides with air support. The one example is ASL 132, Hill 253.5. There, both sides have aircraft, and that's where that SSR is derived from, the bottom one. And if you are looking for scenarios that actually use aircraft, ASL Scenario Archive is your best bet. There's 26 official and 401 total scenarios that involve air support of some variety or another. So there's plenty of adventures out there for you to do using air support. Let's talk about general rules on aircrafts. Just a refresher again, if you haven't seen the video on basics that I put out earlier, by all means check that out. But just to summarize what happened in that video, we have unlimited movement, obviously not hindered by any kind of terrain, and you can be placed anywhere on the map board. Typically, you're placed on the sides or the edges of the map so that you don't interfere with the play that's going on, given the air support at the time. Your aerial LOS reduces all blind hexes to one hex. So you can basically see any non-hidden unit, including concealed units. They're not considered hidden to you. That is not completely surrounded by LOS obstacles, at least one level higher than it. So if you're in the middle of a courtyard and you have one or more story buildings around you, you'll be in a blind hex. But aside from that, you can be seen. Regarding hills, non-cliff crest lines is reduced down to 0 hexes for blind, and the sighting task check was really only impacted by your LV hindrances, and there's some other modifiers which we're going to cover when we get to that. Finally, you must consider that aerial range is actually doubled, so if you're at 3 hexes, you're actually 6 hexes away in terms of game, so you would be rolling on the 0 to 6 to hit table. If you're 4 hexes, you're at 8, and so you're rolling on the 7 to 12 and so forth. So just remember, range is always doubled from the hexes on the board. Now, if you leave the map board, you cannot return, and there's only 3 ways to really leave it. That's if you're eliminated, if you're recalled, or if you voluntarily exit during an enemy movement phase. Again, unless you're engaged in aerial melee. Regarding recalled, however, there's only a couple of conditions that will necessitate a recall, and that's aerial combat. If your opponent rolls a final die roll of 10 or more, you can leave the melee. If you fail a sighting task check by rolling an original 12, you can also be recalled. You'll also have to endure a mistaken attack. And finally, if you're damaged, unless you're held in melee. Now, you can only be damaged once. If you're damaged a second time, your plane's eliminated. Now, there's 2 types of ground support, and there's basically 3 ways to do it. So we have the strafing run. This is done by fodder bombers, could be done by the Stuka dive bomber. But essentially, it's a continuous attack along 4 hexes. So you're going to have 4 MG and 1 bomb attack. However, once that fighter bomber drops that bomb, it may not make further strafing attacks, and the bomb hex basically becomes the final target hex that the plane has to fly over before becoming immune to light AA. And then there's the point attack, and there's 2 ways to do this. This is the Stuka as well as a fighter bomber. Essentially, you're targeting a single hex with all your attacks. You basically have 2 MG and 1 bomb attack on the target hex. Now, aircraft do not cower. They cannot cause interdiction, and they have no rate of fire, with the exception being aerial combat. That's when that applies. So if you have a bomb package, you only have a 1 rate of fire. If you've jettisoned your load or you've dropped it on the enemy and you're free of your bomb, you'll have a 2 rate of fire. Now, you're only worth VP if you're destroyed, and you can engage in dogfight with enemy aircraft, and this does include observation planes. Now, normally observation planes are not represented by any counter, and they do not have any defense in dogfight. However, they can be attacked by enemy aircraft. Let's jump over to anti-air defenses. So you can see the two examples. On the left, you have heavy AA, and on the right, you have light AA examples. Basically, for heavy AA, it's any AA gun without a printed IFE, infantry firepower equivalent. And if it does have that, then it can only fall under the light AA. So what falls under that also is infantry manning a heavy machine gun, and only heavy machine guns, so 50 cals obviously, but no mediums and no lights. If you have a vehicular AAMG, so you must be crew exposed to use it. And if you have an AA capable main armament like the USM-16, MGMC, or the Flak Panzer like you see there. Things to remember about AA is that you lose 1 rate of fire on the first shot after placing or removing the AA counter. So if planes are in the offing and you're the defender, you don't worry about being shut up in your own movement phase, you may want to pre-designate some of your units to be in AA mode, and therefore they don't have to pay for that first shot. There's no intensive, subsequent, or sustained fire allowed, so you're only allowed the 1 shot unless you maintain rate of fire from a light AA weapon. Again, infantry manned HMGs lose their complete rate of fire, but other AA weapons will be able to retain their rate of fire. Any AA capable weapon, exception is the heavy AA, may not fire at an aerial target that it is blind to, nor inside a building or a box. If you're using heavy AA, firing in the prep fire or defensive fire, the plane is not flying low to the ground, it's up in the sky, therefore there's not any real blind hex to it, except for those cases that we mentioned before. You cannot have a fire group, fire lane, or leave any residual fire whenever firing your anti-air. The exception to the fire group, of course, is if it's a mandatory one. If you have multiple weapons, they must all fire, obviously, on the same target. Finally, if a unit exhausts its full rate of fire, it's marked with a prep fire counter as well as the AA counter to represent the fact that it's in that role. If you later want to switch to ground support, then you'll have to remove the AA counter, but you'll also have to pay that penalty for that first shot. And then there's some notes there you can see on the heavy AA and light AA. In terms of damage, for the heavy AA, it's just a 2-hit die roll. There's no effects die roll, just a 2-hit. And a 2, 3, or 4 sees a result against the plane. Now, you can fire that in the prep fire or your own defensive fire phase, but you cannot fire it when the plane is in the middle of an attack. And again, because of the randomness of the skies, planes are not just stationary. If you have friendly aircraft in the field, then there's a likely chance that they might get tagged as well by mistake. However, you do get a -1 die roll when rolling for random selection if you have friendly aircraft. And again, you can also target observer planes. Last thing about heavy AA, your gun rotates as it's following the aircraft, and it's rotated the number of hex spines equal to the white die. Regarding light AA, this is only used during defensive first fire in your friendly movement phase. You can only hit an AC after doing a sighting task check, or if it's in a landing hex. The exception, of course, is Stukas. There's a special rule for that, which we'll get to. And they're always resolved on the vehicle line of the IFT. And only smoke and LV hindrances and the aircraft's armor, which is the number inside the star, you can see in the top left corner of the counter, apply when it comes to light AA. Finally, bounding fire for vehicles. You do pay the penalties, but you do not require MPs to continue shooting. It's a way of pausing the action as the aircraft completes all its actions before you have to expend another movement point. So all that being said, this is the general process. We're going to go through some examples using counters and such. And basically, this is already covered in my basic video, but again, I'm going to summarize it for you. You roll for air support if it's not assigned by SSR. You roll 1 die, which has to be less than the turn number. And if successful, you must place it on the board during your movement phase. Now it is the enemy heavy A turn in the defensive fire phase. They can attempt to shoot it down, and or in their own prep fire phase of their turn, they can have a chance of shooting down your aircraft. And you actually use your plane during the enemy's movement phase. This is a form of defensive first fire, or you can use it before they spend any movement points or movement factors by announcing an air support attack. And you can also, if nothing happens in the movement phase, you can also use your aircraft in your defensive fire phase, provided obviously it has not already attacked. And the way you do this is you declare your ground support attack and you place your AC in an attack position to conduct the attack. Now, where you place it, we're going to get into, but basically a fighter bomber placed 4 hexes away from the target, whether you're doing a strafing or point attack, and the dive bomber, the Stuka, is only 1 hex away from the target. At this point, you conduct a sighting task check, which if you fail, means you have to peel off and your attack is cancelled. However, you're also immune to any light AA. Now, provided you're not a Stuka, once the sighting task check has been made, you can fire any light AA. And after that, you conduct your first strafing. And your fighter bomber can choose to drop its bomb at any point along the 4 hexes. If you're doing a point attack, the fighter bomber can drop his bomb 4 hexes away or 3 hexes away. He only gets 2 attacks in either case, and the bomb has to go off on one of those. And the bomb always goes off after any MG fire, because once you've dropped your bomb, you can no longer make any more attacks. You just move your plane until it's over that target, and that becomes your point where you peel off. After that first attack, you always move 1 hex closer, and then you can declare at this point whether you're going to be doing a strafing or point attack. Remember, you don't have to declare what your attack is going to be until after your first dice roll. Once you make your first machine gun attack, then you can declare if you're going to do a strafing or a point. I'm not sure why they did it that way, but that's the way it is. And again, once you've fired, enemy light AA can also fire on you if it maintains its rate of fire, or if there's another unit nearby that is able to engage you. Again, the exception to this is the Stuka. The Stuka is the only one that can carry out its complete attack before it's fired upon by light AA, given the fact that it's diving from such a high altitude. And the process repeats until you're done your strafing or your point attack. Let's talk about the sighting task check, which is the most important part. As you can see, there's several modifiers that could seriously hinder you. You want to make your sighting task check after you declare your ground support attack. And this is based on the easiest non-hip ground unit in your target hex. Now, observation planes, because you're dropping OBA, you can choose an empty target hex, provided the FFE will land on an enemy. And note that concealed stacks moving in open ground are not considered concealed to the plane. So you can choose to attack a concealed stack, and as long as you make your sighting task check, you can examine the contents, but only if you have a line of sight to it, obviously. So you place your aircraft in the starting attack position, and then you conduct your sighting task check using those modifiers. And there's consequences for failure. If you fail, if you roll more than your morale of 8 with your modifiers, then the attack is called off and the plane is moved back to the board edge. If you make it, obviously you can continue on with the air support attack. Now, if you rolled an original sighting task check of 12, not only is your aircraft recalled at the end of the movement phase or defensive fire phase, but it also is forced to conduct a mistaken attack against your own units by your opponent. He basically temporarily takes control of your plane, and he can move it to any target that's closest to your initial target hex, and he can fire up your own guys. He can choose to do a point. He can choose to do a strafing attack. It's up to him. He can pick the hex grain, and it could really be a bad day if you roll 12 original sighting task check. And if your final sighting task check is also greater than or equal to 12, a mistaken attack occurs. So what you want to do is try and avoid a lot of positive modifiers. For example, firing at concealed units inside a building within 4 hexes of a friendly unit is already looking at a +4, which just makes your life misery, because if you roll 12 or more, you're going to get another mistaken attack on you. All right, so with all that being said, let's get into some examples. First up, we're going to do a fighter bomb strafing run. This is just going to be a plain run, not going to be any anti-air defenses, just to show you the concepts. What we have for the Germans is we have two 4.67s sitting on a truck that is stationary. And we have another 4.67 with a heavy that's concealed in the woods. Americans are going to have two 1942 fighter bombers with bombs. Alright, so first things first, you must declare your intention to put a ground support attack. Again, this is done in the movement phase, or you can wait to your defensive fire phase. But we're going to be in the German movement phase, and before any units move, we're going to declare a ground support attack. So we take our first plane, and we place it 4 hexes away to do our sighting task check. Now again, there are different options that you want to look at. I can set up here, 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 or I can even set up here any way I want. Obviously, you have to factor in those sighting task check dial modifiers, because if you choose poorly, you're going to quickly get called off attack, or maybe even a mistaken attack. So obviously this would be non-choice. This would only be working good if I could. This one would only work if I want to take on the concealed unit in the trees, which again would be looking at a +3 with the dial modifiers. Not good. Here would only be the one truck in the road, or else I can get the squad in the trees. And again, here I could only get the truck in the road. So clearly, this is the best route to set up for a assault. So we place our fighter bomber down 4 hexes away, and as I said, we now make a sighting task check. So the modifiers we're looking at, we have a -1 for being vehicular and a -2 for not being entirely concealed. So clearly with that 5, I made it, and the vehicle is sighted. Now I can conduct my attack. Again, if this was a normal scenario and you had anti-air assets, light anti-air only, then you would be allowed to fire at this point after he makes a sighting task check. So I'm going to take an 8 firepower machine gun shot at the truck in the road. No tail rolls required because we're shooting at an unarmed vehicle. We go right to the vehicle line for the gun. So again, an 8 gives us a base 7. And no other modifiers applied because the truck is stationary. So I need a 7 or less to get a result. There we have a 10. And obviously it's not good enough to hit the truck. So the truck escapes. However, the troops themselves will now be having to go a specific collateral attack because they're passengers on the truck and the truck was not damaged. So using this same roll of a 10, we go to the 8 table. Again, 10 clearly is no hit. And so the troops managed to escape. If we had rolled a 7, for example, the truck would have been immobilized, and the units themselves, again, would also have to undergo a specific collateral attack. So first mark our truck immobilized. Now we're going to use the same 7 that we rolled for the truck on the IFT under, again, the 8 column. So 7 on the 8 is going to be a 1 morale check, which the 2 German squads now have to make. So first squad is broken, and the second squad is broken as well. So they stay on the truck in a broken form. And they are marked with their DM counter. So that's not a bad result. 2 broken squads in a mobilized truck. So now I have a decision to make. Do I want to drop my bomb, or do I want to continue strafing? I also have to decide at this point, am I doing a strafing run or a point attack? Again, you do not have to declare this until after you've fired your first shot. So for this example, I'm going to be doing a strafing run. I'm going to keep on going. So this is the first hex. Now we move 1 hex closer, and I target the second hex. Again, same thing. I do not have to make a sighting task check. However, I will be firing at concealed troops. So this time, the firepower is halved on the 4 table with a +1 for being on the woods. And I rolled horribly, so the machine guns miss, and the troops are still concealed. Now again, I have to make that decision. Do I want to keep strafing, or do I want to drop my bomb? Normally, in this case, with nothing beyond it, you would drop your bomb. But for our purposes, we're going to continue. So you move 1 more. You're now attacking hex 3, which is a blind hex, so you're not going to be shooting. If there was a unit there, they would survive, and then finally you move to hex 4. Attack hex 4. Again, if there was a unit there, you'd be able to shoot them up and or drop your bomb because they're in sight. From this point on, you do not attack anymore, but you must continue flying another 4 hexes to soak up any anti-air fire that exists. So you move on to your target hex. You keep going until you reach your last target hex, and then you can peel off and you're immune from AA fire. So if we back up the action to our failed machine gun attack, we can attempt to drop a bomb now. So again, you're looking at the 7 to 12 column. Again, we need a base 7 because we're firing at infantry in the woods, and they are concealed, and they get a +1 for being in the woods. So they have a total of +3 to the hit roll from the 7, so it's going to be a 4 or less. Now, because I'm dropping a bomb 4 or less, it'd be a waste of a bomb. I may want to choose to fire on the area target type, in which case I would only be paying the +2 for being concealed unit. Again, not the ideal situation, but it is better than firing a 4. So I'm going to fire on the area target type. Again, all I'm paying is a +2 for the concealed target, and so I thus need a 5 or less to hit with my bomb. So 6 is not good enough. I missed. The plane gets flipped over to its non-bomb side, and now it may continue on its path. However, it cannot do any more strafing. So if there had been enemy units in these locations, I would not be able to engage. However, I still must fly over until I land on my final target hex, soak up any last anti-air fire, and then I can peel off. All right, let's sweeten the pot here. So what we've added is a Flak 18 anti-air. Again, not in the anti-air roll right now. We're just going to be covered RP to the east. We've also added a Panzer III that will be there, hatches up, and again, its covered arc is going to be off to the east. We'll assume that that's where the American forces are setting up. Americans have random air support in the form of 2 1942 fighter bombers with bombs. So the first thing that has to happen is we have to, in the American turn, in the rally phase, we have to roll less the turn number to see if we have a reinforcement. So it's turn 4, and we have a 1. So we have air support. Now air support gets placed on the board in the American movement phase. Again, anywhere on the board, typically it's on the board edges, so it doesn't interfere with what's going on in the center of the board. Now at this point we're into the defensive fire phase, and our 88 can choose to fire at the planes. So first thing is we switch to the anti-air roll, which means I now lose 1 rate of fire, so 2 down to a 1. And once I fire, I'll be marked with a prep fire counter. So we take our shot. Again, I need a 2, 3, or 4 to cause any damage. And we have an 11, and that's no good. Now, again, obviously we exceeded our rate of fire, but the 5 on the white die indicates that the gun must undergo 5 hex spine changes as it tracks the plane. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we are now facing to the northeast. And again, we are marked with our AA counter and our prep fire counter. We now enter the German turn. And the first thing in the prep fire phase is our good old 88's going to attempt once more to shoot them down. So you roll. Now we rolled a 1 on the black die, and because I'd already paid the penalty from the last shot, my rate of fire is maintained at 2. So I quite easily made my rate of fire, and I rolled a 5. Unfortunately, a 5 doesn't do anything, but I am allowed another shot because I have rate of fire. And I should have moved my counter 4 hex spines. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, because we had a 4 on the white die from the last turn. All right, again, I maintain rate of fire, and the 5 misses, so we have to go 5 turns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we continue firing. All right, so 8 misses again, and I rolled a 4, which means I've exceeded my rate of fire. So my operation is done for the prep fire phase. Now at this point, again, I have a couple of choices. I know that I'm going to have bombers up in my face in my movement phase, I could choose at this point to lose my concealment, go into the anti-air roll on the off chance of shooting them down, assuming that a smart player will probably rightly determine he's probably going to be coming in this way. Or I can try and retain my concealment depending on what else is going on the map board. So in this particular case, it probably makes sense. It's the German turn, so I can control my assault, that I would switch to the anti-air roll, so I'm going to do that. Actually, no, we'll keep him concealed up. He'll retain his concealment on the off chance that he'll be missing. And again, with vehicle anti-air mounts, you don't have to specify if you're in the anti-air roll. You can freely switch back and forth. You're the only kind of light AA that can do that. But again, it's only a 2 firepower, but it's still better than nothing. So the first thing that happens for a strafing run is you declare your ground support attack, and you put your fighter bomber 4 hexes away from your target. Again, this is the obvious path, just because I can hit the truck, I can hit the squads, and I can hit the vehicle, all in a run of 4 hexes. At this point, I make my sighting task check. And again, it's based on the vehicle in the open, which is a -3. So easily make it, and it's sighted. And now I can fire my 8 firepower machine guns at the truck. Or I could, at this point, as a defender, knowing that I'm about to lose my truck, I could, at this point, switch to the anti-air roll and attempt to shoot the plane down before. Now I'm 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hexes, which is 10. However, I'm well within the range of the 16 for my heavy machine gun. And I already lose my rate of fire because I am a heavy machine gun. So the penalty does not apply for switching. Now we look on our IFT chart. So we have a 7 firepower machine gun on the 6th column, and we need a base 6 to hit the plane. However, again, because of the 2 in the star, it has 2 armor. We subtract that from the 6, means I need a 4 or less to get a result. A 5 would be an interrupted attack. So the heavy machine gun, again, no rate of fire applies. I rolled a 9, and it's ineffective. So I am marked with a prep fire counter, and I'm in the anti-air roll. All right, so the light anti-air is done for now. Again, I could fire my 2 firepower machine gun, but again, I'm going to hold on my attack. Now I have a problem here for this Panzer. I know that this plane's coming my way, and I'm crew exposed, which means I could suffer a collateral attack and worsen myself. However, because he has not fired yet, I cannot switch my position to buttoned up. So the first thing that's going to happen is this plane, having made its sighting task check and absorbed any light anti-air, is now going to fire its 8 firepower machine gun on the truck. So again, we look on the IFT column of the 8 firepower, and we need a base 7 to hit the truck. All right, we have a 9. 9 misses the truck. However, the troops on board now have to take a specific collateral attack because they're passengers, and it's a soft skin vehicle, and so they must take a pinning task check because 9 of the 8's a PTC. So 2, 4, 6, 7s, 1 pinned, and 2 is good. So we have 1 pinned squad and 1 unpinned squad. Now again, as a fighter bomber, I can decide, do I want to drop my ordnance and then cease my strafing, or do I want to save it for the tank, which obviously probably be a smarter play. I'm going to save it for the tank. So the fighter bomber moves 1 closer. I now attack this hex here. So that was 1. This is 2. Again, that was 1. This is 2. So I'm going to be attacking the troops that are no longer concealed in the woods. So it's going to be on the 8 table with a +1. And we have a 4 on the 8 table, which is not good news for the Germans. 4 on the 8 is a 2 morale check, so the squad must take a 2 morale check. And it is broken. All right, I now move my plane one more. 3, this is 3. Again, it is a blind hex. I cannot attack it, so there's no point rolling, and there's nothing there anyways. And then finally, I move to my last firing hex, which is 4 and 4. So first things first, we're going to fire a firepower machine gun into the tank, and for that we need the 7 to 12 column. Again, we have a base 9. No other modifiers apply. The only ones we would use would be the ones with the @ symbol to represent aerial fire. So we need a 9 to hit with the machine guns. So we rolled a 4, which is going to be a hull hit. So we hit with the machine guns, and we hit the hull. Now, it doesn't matter for armor factors what you hit. You're always going to be hit in the rear, and you're always going to be using the lowest value for the armor, which in this case is a 3. So 3 armor factor is equal to a 2 aerial armor factor. So we deduct 2 from our final to kill. So we look at our machine guns. We have a 42F. We have a base 5. We have our modifications. We have rear target facing is +1. And we have rear elevation advantage, which is further +1. So that 5 actually becomes a 7. From that, we deduct 2 for the aerial armor factor, which means a 5 or less is a result. So we roll Snake Eyes, which is a good result. Obviously, we've just killed the vehicle with our machine gun. And it would be a flame because we rolled less than half of our final to kill. Now, for the sake of further explanation, if, for example, the vehicle was not killed by the machine guns missed, we would attempt to drop our bomb on the target. So again, we're going to be on the 7 to 12 column. Again, we're going to need a base 9 to hit, and none of these other modifiers apply. So we have a 6, which again is going to be a hull hit. However, because it is not less than or equal to half of the basic to hit number, in this case a 4 or less, it is considered a near miss. So if it had rolled a 4 or less, that would be considered a direct hit and it will be full firepower. Because it is a near miss in this case, it only uses half of the firepower. So we look at our HE to kill, half of 120 is 60, there's no 60, so we go to the 50 plus, which is a base of 6. Again, to that we add a +1 for the basic to kill, and we add a further +1 for aerial advantage, bringing our kill number up to an 8. From that we subtract the aerial armor factor, which again is only a 2. So we have a 6 or less gets a result, and because it's a bomb, a 7 or less will also be a result on the hull. So we rolled a 6, which is the minimum that we needed. And so, according to the AFE destruction chart, HE equals to the kill number, and we hit the hull, it is an immobilized vehicle. So the vehicle becomes immobilized. And the fighter bomber gets flipped over to its non-bomb side. And it must continue on its path. It's now reached a target hex. Again, if there's any anti-air fire available, it will be sucked up, and it must continue on this path until it reaches the last hex targeted. Once it reaches that hex, again, last round of AA fire, it can peel off, and it is no longer affected by light anti-air. All right, so let's look at a fighter bomber point attack example. Again, we're going to have the same setup. We're going to have an anti-air 88 long, flak 18. We're going to have our Panzer III, which will be crew exposed. Its turret-covered arc is going to be to the east. And then we have, again, a squad with a heavy concealed in the woods. And we have 2 squads on a truck. And we'll even make the truck in motion. That's how it ended off its last turn. And so the Americans, again, by SSR, are going to be getting 1942 fighter bombers with bombs. We know that they're going to arrive on the American turn 3, and after they're attacked on the American turn 4, they'll be recalled. So for this particular case, again, in the movement phase of the American turn 3, we drop our fighter bombers on the map board. In the defensive fire phase, the 88 has a chance to fire on them and try and take them down. So it's going to do that now. Again, we need a 2, 3, or 4. I did not make it. I lose 1 rate of fire for this shot, which didn't apply anyways because I rolled a 5. And because I rolled a 3 on the white die, my hex spine is changed 3 hexes. 1, 2, 3 in a clockwise fashion. Mark with an AA and then mark with a prep fire. Now it is the German turn. And in the prep fire phase, our 88 is going to attempt to fire again. Now, because it already fired in the anti-air roll in the previous turn, it no longer has to pay the 1 rate of fire, so the normal 2 rate of fire will apply. Again, I need a 2, 3, or 4 as a result. And I got a 3. 3 damages a plane. A damaged plane is marked with a wound counter. Now, you can only ever affect 1 plane at a time. Both planes are the same, so it doesn't matter. However, if I had friendly aircraft in the air, I would have to randomize what was hit. I have a very real chance of hitting my own plane, even an observation plane, and or my own fighter bombers. Now, again, because of the there would be a modifier of -1 when it comes to random selection, so it's slightly less, but it's not impossible that you're going to blow your own aircraft out of the air. So because our 88 maintains rate of fire and we rolled a damaged aircraft, again, the aircraft is wounded. So at this point in the German prep fire phase, this fighter bomber would actually be recalled. It would not be able to continue its attack. If it had been wounded in the middle of conducting an attack, it will be able to carry on wounded. And again, if it would sustain a second wound, then it would be eliminated. But because this is the prep fire phase, any damaged aircraft are recalled at the end of that phase. So this bomber is gone, and we have this one here. Now we still maintain rate of fire on the 88, so we can fire again. This time I rolled higher than my rate of fire, and one thing I forgot to do was again rotate the barrel. It was a 1 on the white die, so it should have rotated 1 hex that way. Again, for the second shot, I did not maintain rate of fire. I rolled too high, and I was not able to hit the aircraft, but I must rotate my spine 6 times, which basically is a 360 and brings it back to where it was. I'm now marked with a prep fire, and my actions are done for this turn for that 88. We now jump to the the German movement phase, and again we place our fighter bomber on a point 3 hexes away from our target. Here we must make a sighting task check. Again, we need a -3. And we actually get another one because the target is in motion. So we actually have a -4 to this die roll. Now we rolled a 6 with a -4 is 2. Obviously the vehicle is sighted and I'm able to shoot it. Now I'm going to fire an 8 firepower machine gun attack, but I have to make a decision. I don't have to announce it, but I have to make a decision. Do I want to do a strafing run or do I want to do a point attack? Now I've chosen this vehicle for explicitly because I want to kill the squad, so I'm going to be doing a point attack, and again that's what this example is. So I make an 8 firepower machine gun attack, and I'm going to hold on to my bomb till I'm 1 step closer. So on the 8 column, again we need a base 7 to hit the vehicle. Now it's in motion, so we're actually going to add +2 to the die roll, and there may be a chance I don't hit the vehicle. So we roll this to see if we can shoot the vehicle. We rolled a 3, which is well underneath. So the vehicle is actually going to be destroyed, as are its passengers. Now, because our modified to hit, our base to hit was a 7, less than half, this is actually going to be a blaze. So crew is destroyed, as is the vehicle. Again, for the purpose of this demonstration, we'll assume that the machine guns missed. And so I'm going to move 1 hex closer. At this point, I could choose to do a couple things. Before I do that, I have to declare my type of attack. I'm going to be doing a point attack. And so now the defender knows that this is his only target, so I can stay crew exposed, and I can man my anti-air machine gun for 2 firepower. I can also, at this point, know that I'm not going to be a target, and I'm probably going to want to shoot it down. So I'm going to, once it moves another step, I'm going to unconceal. I'm going to go into the anti-air role, and I'm going to try and shoot the plane down before it can attack. So the plane comes forward once more. Again, all its firepower, all its attacks are going to be focused on the truck. And we're going to have to fire an 8 firepower machine gun, but first it's going to have to endure some light anti-air. So we'll do the machine gun first. We have the 6 firepower. We are 8 hexes away, well within range of the machine gun. So it's just going to be a 6 firepower, which means it's a base 6 to kill. Again, the plane has a 2 in the star, which is its armor factors. So we subtract 2 from that 6, means a 4 or less is a result, and a 5 will be an interrupted attack. So we rolled a 6, which is not good enough, and the even though I rolled a 1 on the rate of fire, remember that heavy machine guns always lose all the rate of fire when firing in the anti-air roll. So it doesn't matter if I rolled a 1 or not, aside from the fact that the rate of fire penalty may have applied. So I marked with a prep fire counter. The plane now has to endure a 2 firepower attack from these machine gun, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 12 hexes away. Now, because it is outside of the normal range of an anti-air machine gun, which is only 8 hexes, it would be half firepower, which means it would fire another 1 table, and the 2 is already hard enough, so I'm not going to bother firing now. I'll have to wait for the plane to come closer. So the plane moves into this next hex location, and again it fires 8 firepower machine gun at the truck, trying to take it out. 8 with a +2 because the truck is still in motion. And the machine guns missed. I almost broke them. And now I launch my bomb. Now, because I'm 3 hexes away, again 6 with aerial LOS, we're on the 0 to 6 column. So we need a base 10 to hit the vehicle. What modifiers that we care about? It's a moving motion vehicle, which is +2, and nothing else applies. So we have a +2 to our base 10, which means an 8 or less is a hit. And we have a 3, which is a critical with the bomb. So on the IFT, critical hit is doubled, so we have a 48 column, and a 240, which will be a further -1 on the table on the 36 column. Again, to destroy the vehicle, anything but a 12 will mean that the vehicle is destroyed. So we rolled a 3, so we have a flaming wreck of a vehicle. All its contents are killed, and the vehicle is ablaze. The fighter bomber gets flipped over to its non-bomb side, and now it must continue on its merry way for a further 3 hexes until it's at such a point it's lying over its target. And at that point, I can choose to fire my 2 firepower machine gun at it. Again, I need snake eyes to hit because on the 2 table we have a base 4. For the vehicle line, we have 2 armor from the plane, which brings it down to a snake eyes for a result. And we failed. And we're also marked with an AA counter. The plane has reached its target hex. Now it can peel off and is no longer impacted by any light AA. It can still be shot at by the heavy, and the American player can choose whether or not he wants to keep it on board. Again, SSR specified at the end of the turn 4 that it would come off board, so he's still got 1 more round where he can do a strafing run, or he can just peel off now and save himself the victory point loss. All right, let's look at a Stuka example. So now Stukas are a bit different. They're a weird bird because they have 2 methods of attacking. You can attack like a strafing run and not drop your bomb with your 4 firepower machine gun, doing your 4 hexes. Or you can do a point attack, dropping your bomb and firing your machine gun. So they're a bit of a weirdo in there, and they're the only ones represented by the dive bomber in the rules. For this scenario, we're going to have a Tiger parked 4 hexes away from a KV-1, which is in bypass of a stone building. And we have troops inside the building manning at 50 cal, and they are concealed. SSR specifies the Germans get 2 Stukas, 1942, with bombs. And we're going to jump right into the movement phase. So the first things first is we pick one of the bombers before the Russians can even begin to move, and we place them down. When we place them down, we want to get our best possible sighting task check modifiers. So we're obviously going to be targeting the vehicle. It's in the same hex as the troops. Now we're not going to be able to impact both unless we use the area target type when we drop our bomb, and or if we decide to designate one or the other with a target from our machine guns. But we're going to have to figure that out when we get to that. So right now, we just got to do a sighting task check, and you want to pick the best modifier. For us, it's a vehicle, which is -1, and not entirely concealed is a further -2, so -3 total. However, we also have a friendly vehicle that's within 4 hexes and in LOS of the plane, and so we must add a +1 to that. So we actually only have a -2 to the sight task check. So the German makes a sighting task check and rolled a 9, barely made it. 9 minus 2 is 7, so it's still within the 8, and the KV-1 is sighted. So at this point, the Stuka is going to fire its machine guns at the troops. Reason why the troops? Because the AP to kill for a Stuka is always a 39F column, which is a base 4, and the only advantage you get is +1 for aerial advantage. And because the aerial armor factor is a 4, it means your machine guns will not be able to penetrate the MG, only your bomb. So we're going to target the troops inside the building with the MG. So it's going to be 4 firepower, half to 2, with a +3 for the stone building. So I rolled a 3, +3 is 6 on the 2. On the 2 gets us a pinning task check, so they lose their concealment. They are already automatically pinned because of the Stuka, so there's no point rolling it. However, for purposes of a sniper, you may want to roll. They would have made their pinning task check, but because, again, the nature of a Stuka, anything that it fires at in the target hex will automatically become pinned if they're unless they're immune to it, for example, berserk, etc. Now the vehicle or the Stuka moves 1 hex closer onto the target, and it will drop its bomb after firing its machine guns again. This time we're going to be firing on the 4 table with a +3 because it is no longer concealed. Again, firing at the troops because the machine guns will not be able to penetrate the KV-1. So again, we have a 6 + 3 is 9 on the 4 will not be sufficient. And so the troops survive. Now I drop my bomb again. Now I have to make my choice. Do I want to use the area target type? Do I want to target the troops in the building, or do I want to target the tank? Area target type would allow me to hit everything, or I could choose one target and the other would be impacted by collateral damage. So I'm going to drop the bomb on the KV-1 just because it's the most effective, and the collateral attack will happen to the squad inside the building. Once more, we look at our table. Again, we are 0 to 6, and we want to use the block number, so we have a base 10. Target size, because it's so large, gives us a further -1. So again, 11 or less will be a hit. So we have a hull hit, or excuse me, a turret hit, and it is not less than or equal to half of the basic to kill number, which means it is a near miss. So it's a hit, but it's not a direct hit. It's a near miss, which means that it only suffers the an attack with half the firepower. So 100 is a base to kill of 10. We have armor factors of 4. Subtract from that is a 6 or less. We have aerial advantage, which again gives us a further +1. So we need a 7 or less to get a result. And we use the same rule as a collateral attack versus the troops inside the building. So we roll a 5. So 5 is less than 7, so the vehicle will be destroyed but not ablaze. And the troops get a +3 because they're in stone to that attack as well. So they have an 8. An 8 on the 20 column gives us a 2 morale check for the troops in the building. Which they fail, and they probably ELR'd as well because it's 1942. So our pinned Russian unit breaks. And the KV-1 is destroyed, and there's a chance of crew survival because it was not ablaze. And the bomber gets flipped over to its non-bomb side, and it must continue on its way. So first things first, do crew survival. And the crew survives. And then the bomber continues on its way. 2, 3. Once you're at the third hex, you can then peel off and you become immune to light anti-air. So that's the way a Stuka dive bomber would go. So let's talk dogfighting. Now, only an undamaged fighter bomber can enter aerial combat willingly with other aircraft. Dive bombers, i.e. the Stuka, cannot. Obviously, observation planes cannot because you don't have an attack. You can only be attacked. Fighter bombers have a rate of fire of 1 if they have their bomb still, or 2 if they jettisoned it or fired it at a target. So to enter aerial combat, this is done in the close combat phase. All you do is you just place your fighter bomber on one or more enemy aircraft. Again, if they're stacked, you can attack multiple aircraft. You can have 1-to-1, 1-to-many, many-to-1, depending on what you want to do. And you cover each stack with a CC marker, and that's now turned a dogfight. The attacker conducts all of his pre-designated attacks first. So if there's 3 planes, he would do 3 attacks before any of the defenders have a chance to defend. And if you have rate of fire, the attacker will be able to continue multiple shots, again, all before the defender is allowed to fire. And if as long as you're not destroyed, the defender can now return fire. If both sides are still engaged in melee, then you flip the counter over to reflect that. Now, normal close combat withdrawal rules do not apply, and you can only jettison bombs during your own movement phase, even if in melee, and you just invert your counter when you do so. So if you know that you're going to be engaging in melee and you don't have any valid targets, you may want to jettison your load so that you have a better chance in close combat, because if you look at the modifiers, again, if target has bombs, it's a -1. If you're firing with a bomb, it's a +1. So it just penalizes you if you're armed with a bomb. The results of a dogfight you can see there. If you roll a 4 or less, you eliminate the target. A 5 damages it. And if you roll a 10 or more, your target has a recall option. So if you're a Stuka, for example, and you've dropped your load, you don't want to lose the victory points to your opponent, and he rolls a 10, 11, or 12, then you can escape the close combat and you can recall off the board. So you can see the summary table there of what happens in a dogfight, the results, and you can also see the die roll there as well. So let's look at an example. All right, in this example, what we have is an 88 Flak 18, again manned with its crew in the anti-air role. The Germans have 2 42 Stukas with bombs, and the Americans have 2 fighter bombers, 1942, with bombs as well, and it is the American turn. So in the American movement phase, I have a choice to make. Do I wait until the German movement phase and then try and take out his armor? Or do I use my own turn to try and take out his planes, which is what I think is a bigger priority because 200-pound bombs can be quite lethal. So in the movement phase, these fighter bombers are going to jettison their load, and therefore they're going to increase their rate of fire by being flipped over to the non-bomb side. Now we jump to the defensive fire phase, still in the American turn, and our anti-air Flak 18. So we have a 6. Now that's not good result, and I don't have rate of fire, And again, because you can attack any plane on the board, mistakenly or not your own, if I would have got a hit, I would have to roll randomly to see which plane was affected, and it may very well hit my own Stuka. Luckily for me, I missed, or you could say badly for me, I missed because it didn't hit the airplanes either. We're now into the close combat phase, and as an American, you can just take your planes and you drop them on a target. So you can go 2-on-1 if you want to guarantee a kill. You can go 1-on-1, or if the two Stukas are in a pack for whatever reason, you can go 1-on-2, and this guy could carry on this mission blowing stuff up on the ground. But for this purpose here, we're just going to go 1-to-1. And then you mark each plane with a CC stack, CC counter to indicate that they're entering close combat. So now we do the actual close combat itself. And if you look at your chart, you can see that clearly the battle is favored to the fighter bomber because he gets a -1 because the target is not a fighter bomber and the target has bombs, so it's a -2. And the results table of 5 or less guarantees a result. And even if you roll a 12, you're still going to be you're less likely to get a recall option on the target. So the American fighter bomber will attack. He gets a -2 on this, so that's a 7, which is not good enough for anything. So the Stuka dive bomber has a chance to retaliate. Now it gets a +1 for being a Stuka, and it gets a +1 for being with bombs, which basically means I need a 3 or less to get a result. Very close, very close. But no joy. So that close combat is over, and they are now locked in melee. Now in the German movement phase, because I'm locked in melee, I'm wisely going to choose to jettison my bomb and just increase my chances. -1 vice or +1 vice +2. So now we're going to move to this close combat. Again, same things. American gets to go first. I rolled rate of fire, and I rolled a 2. And you look at the modifiers again. Target is not a fighter bomber, -1, and it still has his bombs as a -2. So I've clearly destroyed this plane. So this plane comes off. Close combat is over, and we now have an unbombed fighter bomber that can still do strafing runs on targets. All right, let's talk about observation planes. Now, observation planes are basically mobile all-seeing platforms for artillery observers. You basically can get 1 plane per module. Again, typically this is specified in the SSR. And while radio contact and maintenance are still required, you cannot malfunction your radio. Now, you can only be attacked 2 ways. You can be attacked in close combat by another enemy aircraft, again a fighter bomber, or you can be attacked with any heavy AA on the board. If you're held in melee, your radio contact will be lost. Obviously, you cannot continue your mission because you're too busy trying to stay alive. Now, you're considered an off-board observer in the fact that you can pick any board edge along the friendly side and use any hex as your location to conduct any LOS from. So, for example, let's say this Japanese is actually a spotter plane, not a fighter bomber. It can be in any one of these hexes, assuming this is the Japanese board of entry, and you can place any hex. And again, you can move because you're in a plane. You're constantly flying around. You're not affected. You're not going to be impacted by anything. Again, you don't really exist in counter form. You just must indicate which hex you're using to spot from. So in this particular example here, you must pass a sighting task check after all your radio checks and such are done. And once you pass your sighting task check, you don't have to take another one as long as your OBA is firing on the same target. Now, where things get dicey, because again, with a sighting task check, if you pick a poor target, i.e. troops that are concealed inside of a building, you can easily push yourself into the 12 or more range, which means you're going to be suffering a mistaken attack. And that basically lets your opponent drop an FFE wherever he wants on the closest non-hidden enemy ground unit and LOS of the plane. and then it's automatically corrected even if it's not accurate. So you want to try and pick your best target if you're going to use an aerial observer. So for this one here, we're just going to choose 01 as our target hex. In the prep fire phase, we make a radio contact roll. All right, so we have a 6, so the radio contact. We do battery access. But before we can do battery access, we have to do a sighting task check. So I want to place a round right here in R5. Again, because I'm an observation plate, I'm allowed to target an empty hex. I don't have to pick a visible target. However, because I want the modifiers to do my sighting task check, I may want to pick this vehicle because, again, it's not entirely concealed, and it's a vehicle which is a -3, vice a straight up 8. So I want to choose my modifier. I want to pick my best one, and this is going to give me -3 to my sighting task check. All right, so I make my sighting task check. Again, we use the morale of the plane as an 8, and with a -3, clearly that's enough to see the target. Now I do battery access, and I place my spotting round. So we see where it lands. All right, then we do our accuracy die roll. Japanese need a 1, it's not accurate, so now we do deviation. And it goes 3 for 1. Whoop, just where I want it. So I have a spotting round exactly where I want it, and my plane now. I can move my plane, my next turn it can go somewhere here. But again, I do not have to take another sighting task check as long as my OBA does not deviate from this spot. I can just keep launching it time after time, again, assuming you have battery access. Now, on the off chance, again, that you have a, you roll really poorly. Let's say you roll a 12 doing your sighting task check. Again, this falls under mistaken attack. So what your player can now do, assuming you had some forces on the ground, let's imagine that the Japanese actually have an anti-air gun set up in the woods themselves. What your opponent can now do is he can immediately call for an FFE and drop it down on them. They're in line of sight, so they become a valid target. As long as they're the closest one to your original target, he can pick anyone that meets those parameters. He drops it on your gun here. Now we do your normal accuracy. And it's accurate. So he's just dropped an FFE1 on you. Just ruined your day by rolling a mistaken attack. So again, just to clarify, you want to, when you're picking a target to do a sighting task check at, you should pick one that gives you your best chance of getting one, because if you roll 12 or more, you're going to get an FFE dropped on you from your own artillery. All right, let's talk some PTO. I don't play PTO, so I'm not familiar with it too much. Caves, seaborne assaults, etc. So I may make some mistakes here, but basically, you can see on the slides the summary points that you have to bear in mind. Aircraft and seaborne assaults. When you make your sighting task check, for example, those 3 American fighter bombers, you don't count any units that are in ocean locations or friendly units in the beaches for sighting task purposes. So you don't have to pay the extra +1 for having a unit within 4 hexes of an enemy. If you have a fighter, if you have an observation plane conducting an OBA mission and you roll a 12 or more and get a mistaken attack, your opponent cannot place, prior to rolling for the accuracy obviously, an FFE in such a way that it covers one of those beach hexes where your troops are on. So basically it's only good against troops further inland and away from the beaches. When it comes to caves, caves are considered a building for sighting task check purposes, which means it's going to be a +3 to your sighting task check. And if you're successful, then all occupants, even friendly, at the entrance of the cave are sighted, and they become the target of whatever you throw down at them. Now, extra hit die rolls required for each level, because, again, you could have an upper level cave and your troops could be in a lower level, and you may suffer different results. Also, an air attack versus a cave and its contents is also resolved simultaneously, again, versus all sighted units, including your friendly ones. So if you're stacked too close to the cave entrance, it may end up attacking yourself. Looking at landing craft, you basically treat the landing craft as an unarmored vehicle, regardless of the target facing. You treat the landing craft as fully armored if you're dropping a bomb on it. And again, it's resolved as per G12.62. Again, I'm not familiar with the PTO rules. Use of napalm versus a landing craft is NA. And any landing craft that's carrying an AFV, if attacked by an aircraft's machine guns, both can be hit with the machine gun's firepower. Regarding napalm, so scenarios versus Japanese in after 744 and against the Germans after 844 is available to the US. Again, you can determine this by making a napalm availability secret final die roll, so your opponent doesn't know if it's bombs or napalm that's coming down. And you have to get a 1 or less, again with a -2 die roll if you're facing Japanese. And of course, the exception is the SSR specifying they're carrying HE only or such. Now, the British also have access to napalm versus the Japanese in 45 and versus the Germans only in Italy in 45-45. So the tail end of the war in Italy, they're allowed to have it against the Germans. And of course, your GMD Chinese are treated as if they're US, so they have it 744-45 in Burma and 4-8-45 in China. So summing up some of the things that we have to factor in regarding MG armament, again, there's only 3 types. You have 6, 8, and 12 firepower machine gun fighter bombers in the 39, 42, and 44 years. They're not subject to cowering. Again, if you're attacking a building hex, all levels in the LOS are hit using the same effects die roll. And you do not use it to hit die roll unless you're fighting against an AFV. And of course, you got to use all applicable aerial attack die rolls for that. Remember that the Stuka always uses a 39F column, which is the kill number of 4. However, you do have the aerial advantage modification. And again, you can always use the lowest armor to determine aerial armor factor. When firing a bomb versus an AFV, it's treated as an ordnance weapon on the IFT versus unarmored targets or on the HG to kill table versus armored targets. Again, if you're targeting a building hex, the effects are resolved against all targets and LOS of the hex with the same effects die roll. And as we saw, AFVs can either have a near miss or a direct hit. If it's less than or equal to half the basic to hit number, it counts as a near miss. It counts as a direct hit. If it's over that, then it counts as a near miss. However, you can still suffer collateral attacks for any adjacent units. Regarding bombs again, aircraft, you only carry 1 bomb, so once it's fired, it's gone. Again, you use the IFT versus unarmored targets. You use the HE to kill versus armored targets, and you must use a to hit die roll to see if you actually hit your target. Versus a building hex, all targets in LOS are affected with the same IFT effects die roll. So if you have a multi-level building, again, all targets will be affected. And once more, fighter bombers can release their bomb 4 away if you're doing a strafing, or 3 or 4 hexes away if you're doing a point attack. And again, the Stuka always releases its bombs on top of the target. Some final thoughts and to consider about aircraft. I remember attacking aircraft, you don't have to base a sighting tactic on a movement unit. You can always wait until the defensive fire phase. When you interrupt your opponent's movement phase, you're basically freezing everything in place until all AC action is done. So basically all light anti-air operations are done against it and the aircraft's attack is completed. Once that's all done, then you can continue moving your unit. But basically it acts like a freezing motion. You cannot change your C button up status before the initial attack following the sighting task check. So when you have a bomber coming in, it does a sighting task check and your crew exposed, you cannot change your status until after he rolls his attack. Observation planes, again, you do a sighting task check before the battery access. failure obviously means no BA that turn. Once achieved, you don't have to take any further sighting task checks as long as you continue to fire at that same original target. And if you roll a 12 or more as a final sighting task check, a mistaken attack occurs and it's a bad day for you. Now, the sighting task check mistaken attack, again, you want to avoid as many positive die rolls as possible when you're doing this. So factor that into your choice. If it's a question of having one of your own units within 4 hexes of a target, that may be enough for you to avoid it, just in the off chance of dropping an FFV on your own troops. If this is a normal non-OBA plane fighter bomber that suffers a 12 on the sighting task check, then your attacker can take control of the plane and he can attack any of your units closest on hidden on board. You can also choose to do a strafing or point attack, and you can choose the hex grain for both. So again, if you roll poorly because of your positive die roll modifiers, you could have a really bad day. So with regards to bombs, again, there's basically two choices. You can do a direct attack against versus an AFE, or you can try an area target type. You do that with half firepower, but you can affect everything within the target hex. And that was that. So fairly exhaustive overview. Hopefully I've covered everything. If you have any questions, by all means, leave them down below in the comments. I'll try and answer them. And if you require any clarification, I can always release a follow-up video discussing more pertinently about that stuff. Again, regarding the PTO, it's on the agenda for Dave and I. We're probably going to tackle that in the new year, so that's when I'll start worrying about napalm and caves and seaborne assaults. Until then, it's more desert, and all that entails. So if I've glossed over the PTO, apologies. It's just not my strong suit, and I don't want to talk about something I'm not conversant with. Again, let me know what you think in the comments down below if you liked it or not. And please consider giving a thumbs up. Helps the views. And we'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.